Hi, Daughters of May, it's Riasha. We are back. It is episode 9, season 2 of May We Talk series. Thank you so much for joining me on this new time and new day, Monday at 1 p.m. And as if we are in November, at the end of November, in fact. And today we've got a wonderful, skillful, experienced guest joining us, Morvia Gooden. Morvia is a senior program lead in the NHS for inclusion, and she will be speaking to us today about inclusion, identity in the workplace, and imposter syndrome. 3 very huge topics, but we're just going to touch base and get a little bit of insight on each of them based on her experience and her role in healthcare and in the NHS services for a great deal of time. She's a woman that has worked in all aspects really of the service, from midwifery to sexual health and now inclusion. So it would be wonderful to find out from her how she sees diversity within these services and also within society at wide, and how she's managed to tackle any hints of or maybe support people with their feelings of imposter syndrome, as well as how to be inclusive in practice and how to bring your best self forward when you are in the workplace. So without further ado, I am going to wave at a few of you in the comments. Hi, thanks for joining us. And remember that you can also watch this in retrospect. So if you haven't got time today, hi, thanks for joining us. If you haven't got time today, remember you can catch up with the series and the new season of May We Talk if you go into our IG Live tab, just bottom right of your screens, I believe. So let me try and invite Morvia to the chat. Just need to stop this music here. I was playing someone called Jean Baptiste, but without further ado, we've got Morvia with us. Hi, Morvia.
Hello, can you hear me all right?
I can. So amazing
Great.
to see you.
And you?
For the Daughters of May community watching, I have to confess that I do know Morvia personally and familiarly as well, and I love her dearly, but I do not know Morvia as much as I would like to in a professional capacity. So I'm going to be learning a lot, as will everyone else that's tuned in. My auntie Audrey has also tuned in, so it is a family affair.
Hi, Audrey.
Morvia, how are you today?
Very well, very well. Yes, I am.
Good.
Thank you very much.
I can see you've
And
got
thank
into
you for
the...
inviting me.
You're welcome. It's a pleasure to have you. I can see you've got into the Christmas spirit as well, just
Yep.
behind. Very impressive. Mine's very nude. My heart is Christmassy though. I did start eating mince pies 3 weeks ago, and
Oh,
I've roped some people into doing that as well.
yeah, I love mince pies and I love Christmas because I'm a Christmas
Oh,
babe. So I've
oh, of
always loved
course.
Christmas. I'd have my Christmas tree up all year round if I could.
I'm with you there, especially for the food, I must confess. So as we discussed earlier, just in the introduction, today we're going to be looking at identity in the workplace. That will include things like self-concept that I'll get into in a minute, from psychological terms. And then we'll be looking at inclusion, as well as a little bit of what has been made quite a mainstream, even though it's a psychological term, imposter syndrome. So, without going into those things yet, I've given you a little introduction about your very vast and colourful experience from midwife to where you are now. Could you just give us an introduction from your side, please?
Oh my goodness, how long have you got? I was
I
I was
can wait.
thinking about this.
I've got a
I
drink.
was thinking about this the other day. I've worked in the NHS for 39 years
Wow.
and started off as a nurse. I mean, the list is so extensive. So I started out as a nurse, midwife, sexual health nurse, sexual health manager, hemoglobinopathies counsellor, HIV and AIDS counsellor. What else?
Wow.
Leadership, systems leadership development, do you know, I can't even remember. If I have to name them all off, I can't remember it all. The list is so long. 39 years, and it's all within the
Wow.
NHS. So but the heart of all of it is, I used to think, when I was young, I used to think, right, I have to have one avenue and one area to go into. And every time I went into a role, I absolutely loved every role I was in. And I
Yeah.
used to think, that's it, I've nailed it. That's the role I want to be in. Whether it was midwifery, delivering babies, loved it. So obviously that's what I want to do. And then when I moved on and did something else, I loved that too. Teenage sexual health. Loved being with teenagers, young people, loved it. Maybe that's my forte. But then what I realized was that it's people.
Right.
And it's the people that I love being around. I'm a real people person. So
Right.
you can't just stick me in an office and that's it. I
Mm.
have to connect. It's all about people and connection. So that, in a nutshell, that's my career and history for you.
Well, that is amazing. And firstly, we applaud you because without being, at all patronizing, that is something that you have delivered a service to so many communities and so many generations of people in both, your hometown, which I'll say, if you don't mind, is Nottingham, because it's in your
Yeah.
bio, and nationally as well. So we thank you for that, and can only imagine the various types of backgrounds of gender, race, nationality, belief systems, people of all different areas that you've come across when trying to provide them with these different services. So no one better really to speak to about with these topics. So firstly, I'm just going to give, because obviously I'm studying from a psychological perspective, we will say this is not a mental health clinical platform, but we do have interest in well-being and mental health. So we'll always
Mm.
lead back to that, but neither of us are mental health professionals. We're just speaking from our own various studies and experiences, mine being very young and new as far as I've just started studying, and Morbia's being, as you heard, a vast, brilliantly diverse career. So when we talk about identity, Morvia, from my findings, I've found that it really includes, from a psychological perspective, what we call self-image or self-concept. And they can be things that are known as physical attributes, whether it's your hair color, your height, things that are factual like your age, or it can be more psychological traits, be it I see myself as this this way emotionally, this way socially as a category, or this way as far as my sexual orientation. So there's many different pockets or labels that go under, or an umbrella of what we call identity. So it's so very broad. We won't cover it all, but I guess my first question, I'm doing things a bit differently today. You'll see me looking at the screen because my cards didn't print how I wanted them to. So I'm looking at my screen. And my first question to you would be, based upon your lived experience and professional understanding also of the word identity, how would you describe it? I've given a bit of a kind of
Yeah.
trainee psychological understanding of it, but what's yours?
So for me, identity is, in a nutshell, is the story that people tell about who
Mm.
they are. And not only is it the story that people tell about who they are, but it's also the fact that it is socially and externally constructed.
Mm-hmm.
And coupled with that, it's internally perceived. So it's down to what socially people think we are and who they think we are, and how we construct that within ourselves and how
Right.
we absorb it and internalize it. So identity is huge. And if we think about what is our identity and how did we arrive at that identity? So, and what aspects of the identity that we claim for ourselves do we see as important? And
Mm.
is there anything that's changing or not
Right.
changing? And who says that that's the identity that we have to have? And I think if we look at in terms of sexuality,
Yes.
That is an identity over the last decade that has come into prominence, and there is more fluidity within that as an identity and as a descriptor. So, it's really turned identity on its head in that
Yes.
respect.
Similarly
So,
with gender as well, gender prescription. Yeah.
absolutely.
And it's not to say that
Absolutely.
that hasn't always been fluid. What I guess we're saying
Yeah,
is that legalistically, it has now become more
absolutely.
of a fluid concept where it wasn't before.
Yeah,
And also, if we looked at maybe the DSM, which would be the Diagnostic Statistics Manual, that would previously have been deemed a mental health issue, which we now understand is not. And it has, as I said, I'm not a psychiatric professional, but I do understand that those terms and those understandings have now changed based upon our evolution and society as well. But
absolutely.
I love what you said at the beginning, Morvia, about it being the story that we tell ourselves, as well as so it's an internal one and an external one, because that also
Absolutely.
means that it might vary in different environments, which we'll get to
Absolutely. So if we
later.
look at, for example, the identity of race,
Yes,
race is socially constructed.
yes,
It's not, there isn't, race doesn't actually exist. It's been socially constructed as a
yes,
divide and a rule tactic. So if we have to understand the historical context of race in order to understand why it was socially constructed. So it was constructed to justify slavery. And
right.
so there were
We've got a lot
if
of
we think
people
about,
agreeing, just so you know, Morvia, in the comments with that
oh,
point. So
okay,
please
okay.
continue.
Right. So yeah, it was constructed to justify slavery, because in order for slavery to happen, white people had to justify why they were going to use the political term black people or
Yes,
people of a different race
yes,
to in order to make this cultural to make slavery work for them from an economical point of view.
right.
And then there are hierarchies of color within that. So back in the day, prior to slavery, what they had to do was, so what they said was, the darker you are, the more that you were a beast, seen as an
Right,
animal or a beast of burden. And
right.
so therefore they were able to justify slavery. So if you think about that as an identity that many people take on, I am black, I am, and way back they had all different names, Negro,
Yes,
colored, all sorts of
yes,
names. And we're still arguing about the different names and labels
yes.
now.
And if
And
we
I
look at,
think,
sorry to interject there, but if we look at
go on.
people of color as a whole as well, we had all sorts of terms that labeled how black you were, and the
Absolutely.
closeness to whiteness. And I can remember even doing
Yeah,
research myself of Jamaica, and there was something called an honorable white, which meant that you would be able to run to have a seat in what would have been then like a local kind of, not House of Parliament, but something more
yeah,
localized, based upon the shade of your skin being seen closer to whiteness. So there's so much
absolutely.
historical depth to this, isn't there, Morvia?
Yeah, and that is the legacy of colonialism and
Right,
slavery.
right.
So so we talk about white privilege, but there is also privileges within skin color,
Yes, yes.
and that still happens. It might not be as overt as
Mm-hmm,
it once was, but it
mm-hmm,
still happens. If you look around you in your places of work,
mm-hmm.
you will see that there are lighter skinned black people that are in more higher positions than darker skinned black
Mm,
people.
mm,
And and whilst it might not have been an overt thing in terms of the recruitment and selection, it's very much a covert
right.
phenomena that happens.
Because we
And we talk,
internalize this history. And so when we're hiring or
absolutely,
when we're going for places of work, even I must say, we'll get onto appearance later, but the way I wear my hair for an interview used to be, not so
absolutely,
much anymore because it's working in my favor, but historically I've doctored the way that I've worn my hair to an interview, because I
yeah,
know that the closer to my blackness, and I don't mind admitting this, the closer to my blackness that I appear is, it could be read in a positive or negative light, and that is terrible, but
Absolutely.
it's true. So yeah.
Absolutely. And those things still ring true today. I mean,
I
hair
think there's
for
been
black
change.
women, yeah, there is a change, but even still today, hair for black women is a very emotive subject.
Yes.
It really is.
Yes.
Many black women won't wear their natural hair. And I know there is a change coming. And this is what I love about, the future, because young people today are not accepting what my generation and before me
Had to.
accepted. And
Mm.
we had to
Because you were
accept in order
fighting other
to.
things, so there has to be
Absolutely.
things that you don't go.
And part of that was
Against.
all about fitting in as well,
Yes.
all about fitting in and that sense of belonging. But it led to cognitive dissonance, because
Right.
in order to fit in and be, as far away from yourself as possible, creates a sense of dissonance, not knowing who
Right.
you are,
Right.
And that's really, really important, particularly for people that are othered. And if you
Right.
think about, in terms of othering, so black women are often othered as not the norm. So
Yes.
the norm in organizations are white, cisgendered, straight men.
That's
That's the
right.
norm.
Yes.
So as a black woman, if you go into an organization, you are not automatically seen as a leader, for
Right.
example. So if you were to Google, if anybody Googled right now in this day and age what a leader is, you would, and then pressed on images on
Yes.
Google, what you would see is a whole picture, loads of images of white males. Because if you think about it, it's almost like this societal conscience. Google is almost like a societal
Yes.
conscience. That's what the perception of leaders are.
And we
So when
all
you,
internalize that, it's not a case of
absolutely,
saying, we're demonizing those with that privilege.
absolutely,
We also can internalize that, hence why representation can be so, so very important. And hence why people like yourself in the positions that you're in, so valuable and so wonderful to see. And we need to shine a light on people like yourself.
absolutely. Thank you for
It's
saying that.
true.
But it makes all of those things, because they're so insidious, you don't think about it. And what we do is we normalize the abnormal.
Right.
So when you click onto that image that shows you, if you type in leadership and leaders and it shows you those images, nobody questions it.
Right.
So we as a society normalize the abnormal. When you're
Yes.
walking around in your daily life, normalizing the abnormal. So there's a picture, I'm not sure if anybody's seen it, but there's a photograph of a little white girl. I think she's probably about 9, that kind of age, in a store. And when you imagine a toys shop, and she's on an aisle where there's all dolls, and all of the dolls are black. And now, but that image alone creates so much confusion for people,
Because the little
because
girl is
we've
non-black.
disrupted, the little girl is white,
Okay.
and she looks up at an aisle in a toy store full of black dolls, no white doll in sight. But it disrupts the current paradigms that
Right.
exist, which
Yes.
is the normalizing the abnormal. So
Yes.
when a little black girl goes into a toy store, and the norm is for her to see all white dolls, predominantly now, we do have a few more black
Yes.
dolls now, but all white dolls, nobody questions that.
Because it's the norm.
Nobody questions it. But when we disrupt those concepts and paradigms, people are like, because if you look at what's happening now in the news and the media, you're seeing a lot more adverts where you're seeing a lot more black faces now and black people on
So many,
adverts.
to the point where actually I've
So
begun to come, because obviously I work in, for those of you that are just joining us for season 2, I also work in acting. So although I'm in social care as a support worker and I study psychology, I work in acting. So I do really watch commercials from that guise of, I could be in that commercial potentially or go for an audition. And they are really asking for a lot more people of color to audition, and you're seeing so many, a plethora of different shades, and it just really makes me laugh, actually.
Yeah,
Because it's gone almost from one extreme to another, to the point where people that
absolutely.
do have any type of discriminatory views must really be upset right now, because it's gone
Yeah,
from one every few days to so many different adverts with Asian people, Black people, interracial couples. It's really great to see, actually. And
yeah.
I'm just going to bring us back, because I'd like to know, on a personal level, we've talked about identity as far as race, and we've
Mm.
touched on sexuality. I'm sure we'll get into gender later on as well. But with all these things being said, how would Morvia Gooden, I'm not even going to put the MA at the end or any of the other titles, because they're for you to add. What are the 5 words that you think you personally describe yourself as? What is your story? If you had to say, I am this, this,
Yeah.
this, this, and this, what are the 5 words that you choose?
And it's interesting because I thought to myself, I bet she's going to ask me that question. What is my identity? How do I perceive my
How do you
identity?
perceive
So,
yourself?
and I thought that just, this morning, I thought to myself, right, what would I say for my identity?
Mm-hmm.
And what I would actually say is, given that I've already told you about the story that we tell about ourselves and who we are, I see my identity as a soul experiencing this planet in the body of a Black female mother, professional. What else? You said 5.
Yes, you're doing
And
really
woman.
well.
Oh, I did put female
Well,
woman. Yeah.
do you know what? I would take female and woman, could be the same or different, actually, because it just depends on your line of thinking regarding. There's a massive conversation happening right now about what makes a woman. Is it a biology? Is it
Yeah.
a construction, socially constructed? So many different things. So again, we don't have the time. It's a wonderful topic, but we don't
Yeah.
have the time to get into that today, and I'm not necessarily qualified either.
Yeah.
But so you said female, woman, professional, mother, and Black.
Yes.
To me, they are wonderful descriptors that what we discussed as social and maybe family categories. They're labels socially that can be read from internally and externally. If we're thinking about any other attributes, like maybe emotional or psychological traits, what would be 3 characteristics that you think you have to describe your identity? To help you,
Um,
I would say mine: I am curious, I am playful, and I am deep thinking. They're just 3. So playful,
mm.
curious, deep thinking. What are 3 emotional or psychological traits that you think you have as part of your identity?
Yeah, that's interesting because I would have said that I'm curious. I'm always looking. I'm a lifelong learner. I'm always looking to learn
Mm,
something new. I'm always wanting to seek possibilities, new possibilities. So I'm a curious seeker of
mm,
possibilities.
yes,
And I would say that I'm very loving, uh,
I can
just
attest to that.
wanting, and a deep sense of social justice. I have
Yes,
a deep sense of that.
yes.
So, and that social justice kind of like, steers me.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
I've always had that right from a very, very young age. And that steers everything
Mm.
I've done, whether in my career, my direction in life, everything. So
Amazing. Okay. So that, and you can see how that's tied into your career as well. So
definitely,
very interesting that your internal story has actually now become your external story. So
absolutely,
it says a lot about the stories we tell ourselves and how that becomes reality, in fact, and our
absolutely.
self-talk. Someone else, just to go back to the comments, someone's added, I would add nurturer for Morvia. Someone else has added leader, and and said you're also very wise. So these are the
Oh, that's
external,
sweet.
yes, these are the external qualities that are coming out from this conversation as far as identity, which is really interesting to see how we are perceived as well as how we perceive ourselves. Um,
Absolutely.
I'm going to look over here because, as I said, my cards are not helping me today. My cards, I'm looking at my laptop. And how I would like to ask you a more general question now. How have you seen the mental health and well-being um, affected during the last year of when it comes to people's identity from the different clients that you work with, as well as maybe, I don't know if you have much hands-on with patients anymore, but how have you seen their identity be affected, and what support have you needed to offer them to support their well-being?
Yeah. I think so. I don't have hands-on with patients anymore, unfortunately. That's the one big thing I do miss.
Mm.
However, because I'm also an executive coach, I
Right.
do offer out my coaching to many of my clients and many of the workforce within the NHS. And
Right.
so, and often they tell me that, there's been a lot of burden for them working within the NHS. I'm talking about within the sector of the NHS,
Hmm.
and particularly working from home, or even if they
Right.
have to work in the wards, particularly from a health, a well-being aspect. So,
Right.
and if we think about, for example, the discrimination, the everyday discrimination that is apparent within our organizations. So during this pandemic, it's you would have thought it would be lessened, but it's been actually worse for many people.
Wow.
So some of the examples that they've talked about is, for example, with the PPE, the protective clothing for going to work on the wards and the assessments. Many BME people, the other label for black
Yes.
people, politically black,
Yes.
um, um, many black people had extra assessments because they were having disparities within, contracting the COVID and dying in
Yes.
disproportionate numbers.
Yes.
And so staff, their colleagues were saying to them things like, oh, you're getting, even more favorable treatment because you're black, so you're having extra assessments. And so those sorts of comments were really impacting on the well-being of many of the black staff that I
Yes.
was coaching. So it's those sorts of comments that were really, 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 really disgusting comments
Yes.
that they were getting,
And
and
that's across the
flooring
board,
many
I must
people.
say,
Yeah,
Novia. Sorry to interject there, but
yeah,
I remember at the beginning of the pandemic speaking with somebody that works in a council position, within the youth services, and they firsthand experienced exactly the same thing. People feeling that, I think it comes from fear,
hmm
people feeling that there was this favor that was being
mm,
given to people that were Black, Asian, or maybe of some demographic that had a disproportionately high risk to COVID. Now, there is no favor. This is a very uh,
mm.
concerning, dangerous disease. And so, if you are at high risk, that means you are really deserving of any extra attention, because it is not something to be toyed with. So it just really showed the flaws, I think, in our compassion for one another more than anything. And I really hope that with knowledge now we can move forward and really look after those more vulnerable groups, the elderly,
Absolutely.
and not see them as a burden instead.
Absolutely. And it was rough out there for many, many people. So, yeah, during this pandemic, those were the sorts of things that were going on. And I
Right.
was able to support through coaching. So, that was useful.
Wonderful. So what you would do is, correct me if I'm wrong, coach the other people that are in managerial positions so that the support would filter down in mediating
Yeah,
between those different issues that were coming up. Well,
absolutely.
thank goodness for that. Another person, Shay Organics, thanks for joining us. And Francique Karim has also said that was happening in a range of industries. So yes,
Yeah,
definitely not
yeah,
just NHS based. So
absolutely.
um,
Racism has no boundaries.
no,
So,
unfortunately.
absolutely.
So I would also like to ask you another question around mental health in the workplace. It's being prioritized more than ever in all sorts of industries and sectors and the mainstream, which I believe is a good thing. I'm having open discussions, even working in theatre land at the moment. There are people being trained up as mental health first aiders. There's more kind of compassion and openness and conversations that are being had around each individual's state of being, if they choose to share that and if they feel comfortable revealing that with their employer. So I think that's good. But with that being said, how might Black women particularly seek advice and support with matters around their identity, be it race, gender, social roles? Being a working mum is a big one. How would you advise a employee to seek advice from their employer or support in those areas?
I think before you even go to seek advice and support, what I would say to each and everybody is think about what the story you tell yourself about who you are. Because until you kind of like figure that out, then going to seek advice and support is almost like layering it again about, well, I'm not sure about who I am, what I need.
I see what you mean.
Can you see? So that's what I would say first and foremost, create the picture for yourself, of yourself, for yourself, first of all. Okay. And then what I would say is, please do seek support, and where it may be that it's not in the workplace is the best place for you to get the support. It may be that friends and family is the support that you require. Because what we find is, in terms of people that kind of like, and it sounds awful, but make it through organizations. When you are othered, either by your gender, sexuality, race, religion, whatever, people who make it or sustain their mental health through organizations is when they have a real bedrock of support within their own social systems.
Right.
So whether it be a friend, whether it be a network, whether it be this wonderful platform that you've got going here.
Thank you, Mom.
And that is a real source of support for people. So people are constantly searching, and it goes down into this imposter syndrome. Oh, can I do this? Can I not? Seek out first some support that you can gain, outside of your organization, and then seek out some support within your organization.
Wonderful. That's really wonderful advice, because yes, this platform was born out of kind of trying to give myself a safe place, others a safe place to really commune and share support, advice, and that sense of community. And if there are specific areas to employment, so I don't know, back to the being a mother, maybe a social identity that will directly be impacted by your employment, do you think there's a way in which you can have those discussions without making it a place of conflict, or a place where you might feel vulnerable in that place of your identity, being a mother, being maybe a single mother even? How would you advise people broach those kind of conversations with their employer? Because it is a part of their identity that directly impacts their work and vice versa. Who do you think departmentally is the best person to speak to, and how should they approach those conversations?
Well, I mean, if you get on with your line manager, because that is a big if, the best place to start with is your line manager. Because if your line manager is not going to support you, that can create a whole different plethora of other problems. Right. So your line manager is the best person, really, if you get on with them. If not, then the usual routes, HR, human resources department, and that should have the necessary lines of inquiry that you need to find the support that you require. And if you do have an organizational website, there should be offers of health and well-being on the organisational website. So, for example,
Is
in
that now
our
compulsory?
I'm not sure if it's compulsory, but I know that for the NHS, so I work nationally for the NHS. So on a national level in the NHS, we have, a whole, massive page dedicated to health and well-being. And that's for all staff, all workforce within the NHS. And, we've tried all sorts of things. And it's particularly come to the fore, as you said, following the pandemic, during this pandemic.
It has. I worked for a day provision, and even there, they had access to counselling. It was a private company that was available to staff members. They even went so far as providing 5 mental health days per annum, which is unheard of. I've never known a company offer that, and especially in a social care sector. So things are changing, and
they are changing.
It's
they
promising.
really are. And I think organisations are seeing the real psychological impact of this pandemic. So it's not just physical, but it's a psychological impact as well. And actually recognising that workforce are their best asset. Yes. And if you don't care for those who care, then clients and patients suffer.
That is right. And it affects your whole business, even in any business model, whether it's in social care, whether it's in NHS, medicine, or otherwise. Based on what you said, you made a key point. Your line manager, your identity and how you are treated based on your external identity can often be a place of vulnerability if you are not treated well by those in senior positions. Absolutely. Can you just discuss, I'm aware, because obviously, like I said, with my studies and interests, I'm aware that there are 9 protected characteristics that which people may or may not be aware of, and this is under what's called the Equality Act. I believe it's 2010. Without getting too legalistic, and I'm not expecting you to list them all because I've just studied this and I can't list it all off the top of my head. But can you tell us how your work relates to upholding some of these characteristics when people are not supported by their management, by their line manager, by different support mechanisms that should or should not, be in place to different extents? How does your work make sure that these 9 characteristics are supported in the workplace, Morvia? So
in my work, what my work is fundamentally surrounded by is inclusive system development. So what that means in a nutshell is looking at the system. So working nationally, I'm not working on local issues. I'm looking at the system as a whole and how we can, ensure that the system can carry out its duties. And how we look at that is through leadership behaviours. And so one of the things that we've done is, I'm just going to talk about a small thing. So I've just co-designed a huge event for all of the 1.3 million NHS staff around how to have conversations about race. Because what we know is, and that's just one topic, and because what we know is, as an example, what we know is that people don't like to have the difficult conversations. And the difficult conversations stop people in their tracks. If we can't have a conversation just about, for example, race, then how can anything change? And so we did a series throughout the whole of Black History Month in October on and getting leaders together, and we did a webinar throughout the whole of October talking about race and what their commitments were towards race. And so that went down really well, and that's recorded as well. So if anybody wants to look at that, it should be on the website, NHSEI website.
Brilliant. And I'll get the link of that from you later on, and I'll definitely pin that at the bottom of the conversation. I'd love to see it myself. So thank you.
Yeah, so they're just some of the things that we do. So one of the other things that we did was develop a program which we called it Inclusive Leadership Board a board offer in terms of inclusive leadership development. And so looking at how we get, because we know that, you know, there's a author, I've forgotten his name now, and he talks about how the fish rots from the head. So we start off with senior leaders and how they set the tone of their organizations. And so we look at how we can, you know, kind of change leadership behaviors so it trickles down to people on the front lines. So for me, I'm interested in what is the difference that it makes to the porter in the hospital? What is the difference that it makes to the healthcare assistant that is out in a care home? What is the difference that it makes to them? And so that's the level of, so looking right at the top of the organization and how those behavior changes trickle right down to our people on the front line.
Which directly impacts those in this community, you know, more than ever, because
Absolutely.
a lot of our grandparents, a lot of our parents, a lot of us do work
Absolutely.
in those professions, healthcare assistants, working for the NHS. That is historically, you know, what a lot of Black women have done, especially for my family on a personal level. So to know that those conversations are now being had at the top means that the next generations are going to really benefit. And as you say, if the employees are benefiting, then therefore the patients or therefore the customer also benefits, don't they?
Yeah. Absolutely. So one of the sorts of things that we look at, for example, is we discuss micro inequities. And so micro inequity is like the small, what we call, so for example, when you get a small mosquito bite, you know, you think, oh, that's a bite, I'm not bothered about it. But if you get several, then it impacts you adversely. And so a micro inequity would be something like somebody not pronouncing your name correctly. You know, and I'm sure you get that reactor. I get that all the time. But to other people, it's nothing. But what it does is it seeks to invalidate you.
Yeah.
And so through some of our training development programs, what we do is we highlight those things. We have discussions about the micro inequities that exist. So so for example, if you're on a board, for example, and as a woman, there's a lot of gender inequality that we know that exists, and a lot of people don't see it, and a lot of women don't see it either. So one of the things that we kind of like demonstrate is if you look at a board, and when women, you know, this generally tends to happen. If a woman puts forward an idea or a suggestion, the board chair, who is normally a man, will tend to go, thank you, Sally, or whatever the name is, and then go on to the next idea. And then maybe 5 minutes later, a man might proffer essentially the same suggestion that the woman already proffered 5 minutes ago, but the chair then says, oh, Alan, that was great. That's a great idea. And then the woman will look around and she'll say to herself, did I not just say that 5 minutes ago? And then she's seeking support around the room. Nobody says anything. So then what she does is she goes smaller in the chair, and she no longer says anything at that board meeting.
And that's where we get a conflict. Sorry to just cut you there, because I want you to continue that thought. But a conflict between multiple identities, because you can be both at I don't like the word disadvantage, but at a point where you are deemed less valued as far as being a contributor based on your race, based on your gender, and then you may have another counterpart that has the same race as you but a different outward gender, and therefore they're seen as more valuable at that table. And it's just about making sure that there is a sense of, which we'll get to, inclusion for all, and it's not about these external characteristics or labels that are already being used against us as a way of belittling ideas. Because if we're at the table, we're all at the table, and there needs to be
But if
this
people don't
equity.
recognize that those small micro inequities exist,
Yes.
then it's difficult to name them. And because, so for that, for example, that woman that I've just described, she will just think that that's her. So obviously, you know, that's something about her. She'll make herself smaller. And that's where we say that that's where the mystery of the glass ceiling, that's where it's at, in
Yes.
those micro inequities. And over time, they can really seek to really invalidate individuals that are traditionally othered.
And what would you recommend in those situations? Obviously, this is a bit of a general question, but say there
Mm,
was Sally and she's now
mm,
shrunken herself. Someone in the comments has
mm,
just said, thank you, Francique, just said, there is so much talk about race and not much doing sometimes in these different
mm,
environments of work, these different places of
mm,
work. How can we, if these things are microaggressions and micro
mhm.
inequities, how can we speak on them and be heard and have some action take
Yeah.
place if we're not in those positions of power ourselves?
And that's where allyship becomes
Right.
really important. And this is not about speaking on behalf of somebody else. This is about when somebody else mentions it,
Yes.
it becomes more, seen. Whereas if that person who, if, say, for example, Sally was to talk up, she would then be labeled as, oh, look at her making a fuss,
Yes.
just because she wasn't heard. But if somebody else was to say, actually, I'm sure Sally made that point slightly earlier. Sally, we'd like to hear more about what you think on that. So it's those sorts of things, and that's where your allyship really does work in those kinds of spaces. Not speaking up for that person, but what you're doing is you're recognizing that an inequity has taken place.
Yeah.
Because otherwise they're often swept under the carpet, because we don't, the overt stuff doesn't happen so much anymore. It's a lot of covert things that happen, that go unrecognized by
Because sometimes
many,
the
many
person
people.
doesn't recognize that they're doing it themselves. And that's where it's
Absolutely.
really difficult to highlight, isn't it?
Absolutely.
I would like to move us on from identity in the workplace, but it's still all part and parcel.
Yeah.
Before we do that, I just want to thank the people in the comments for being so vocal and contributing to the conversation, because it really helps have your feedback as well. And to just take a breath, because these are very heavy topics. So just,
They are.
I don't know how you speak on them every day. I know it's your profession, but at the same time, when it's your lived experience, it can be a little bit triggering as well. So for anyone that's, feeling that way, have some water, take a deep
Yeah.
breath, do what you've got to do, because you might be going through that right now. And I hope that we are offering you some support and advice, or at least signposting you to where you can get that if it's something you're going through. We are going to move on to imposter syndrome, which actually might offer and highlight ways of making yourself feel valued and heard from an internal way, the things that we say to ourselves, the story that we tell ourselves, and going against what we might see. Maybe that's people that don't look like us, people that don't think like us, people that don't have the same lived experiences as in our workplace. So for you, having studied midwifery in, I'm not going to say the decade, but like you said, your career's been 39 years long in Ipswich, and leaving your hometown of Nottingham, how would you say you adjusted, if you reflect, to the new environment and the role that was required of you during that period of training?
So for me, when I was much, much younger, I was really fiery and really, well, what do you mean? I didn't stand for no nonsense, and
I think I could believe that.
yeah, but the thing is, what's interesting is as the you work in these organizations, you're at the sharp end of discrimination every day, being a woman, being black, etc., etc., etc. It kind of weathers you.
Right.
And what I found was that instead of shouting out and, being really quite demanding in a way, what I've learned to do over the years is learn different tactics to put my points across. So, for example, that kind of before when I was younger, because I started when I was 18. So, and I'd be like, but why can't we do this? That kind of approach. Whereas now, I'm more in so I use data to back up anything that I need to happen. Also, I make sure that my voice is softer, because what happens is that as a black woman, I'm talking about for myself, as a black woman, we are labeled, if we talk loudly, we are labeled as the aggressor. So we have, that is a stereotypical label afforded to black women in particular. And so what I've learned to do over the years is kind of like tone myself so that I can make it through. And that doesn't mean to say that it's right, because what I'm doing, I'm kind of like toning it down to fit in with their norms of who they think I should be. But it actually gets me through as well. So their tone policing is their issue, not my issue.
Theirs. And I'm so glad that you said that,
yes,
because I don't want anyone to misconstrue you finding different tactics as a way of shrinking yourself, because you're not necessarily shrinking yourself. You are trying to assess the dynamic, assess what is at the table, and how you can be most heard. And if that means speaking their language to a degree, then you do that with the most the tactic, I guess, that aligns with you most, that will not force you to compromise who you are or be of the greatest strain, because you don't want it to put strain on you, and then you go home feeling like you've had this massive effort to cover up who you actually are. How do you get that balance?
And if you recognize what's going on out there, recognize what the current paradigms are, recognize what the stories are that are out there in society and that are pervasive within our communities and pervasive within our organizations, and then you can say to yourself, well, that's the story that's told out there, but that's not the story of who I am. And then you operate within that paradigm that you construct for yourself. So that's what I read a colleague's thesis a couple of years ago, and one of the lines that it said in there that really resonated with me, and it said, learning to speak the silence of my mother. And, going back generations, our mothers did not have the voices. They weren't afforded the voices that we are today. And so that learning to speak the silence of my mother in a different way now that my mother was unable to, back then.
I think the difference is key, because I must say that for me personally, in one company that I worked in, which was actually in a performing arts environment, I had to dim my desire to be vocal, my natural commanding presence, to make people feel comfortable. And I think it's really important not to go to that extreme, because then you leave empty and also lacking respect for yourself and your own character and the story that you know to be true. So it is really important. I must impress, having been through that myself, to find that balance and to find, okay, how can I converse or get my point across, yes, without being labeled with the burdens of that person's ignorance or that person's construct of what a black woman is, aggressive, loud, but also if it is within my character to be dominant, a leader, charismatic, that those traits of mine, those psychological or social traits, are not quashed, are not dimmed. It's just about finding a way to harness them, I suppose, so that
Mhm.
they are better received.
Absolutely. And be brave enough to have a conversation about. So if something comes up, have a conversation about it with somebody else.
Yeah.
That if somebody was say to you, tone police you, then be brave enough to have a conversation about, well, what does that mean for you? How does that manifest for you? Because it doesn't. I don't identify with what you're saying. So if we can't have the conversations, then things can't change.
Right.
But change only happens one conversation at a time.
Right. I am going to I've had a little technical situation, so I'm going to take out these and make sure that you can still hear me. Can you still hear
Yeah,
me?
yeah. Yes.
Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Wonderful. And if we've got people in the community, can you please give me a love heart or a wave so I know that you can still hear me? I tried to be, with the times and wear headphones, which have now just lost their charge. So we're going back to the old school. Now we're just going to move on a little more from imposter syndrome, because I know I've had you for a little while now, and I want to make sure that we cover all areas. Thank you. Everyone can still hear, and thank you for staying with us all in the comments there. I think we've just covered, your journey from midwifery and how that now has brought you to where you are now and the person you are, as far as knowing yourself, how to present yourself in the workplace. For those who may not have found or learned that confidence yet and feel a sense of anxiety or inadequacy in new roles or in transitory periods of their career, for example, what advice would you give them in that transition to leveling up?
Yeah. Well, first of all, to say that is absolutely normal phenomena. So when you go into a new role, and that's with anyone, you go into a place of what we call conscious incompetence.
Right. You're completely
Yeah.
right. I just read something that said 70% of people face what is known as, and it can be different levels of imposter syndrome. You might just feel a little bit concerned and worried, or the term that you've just said, which was
conscious incompetence. So if
conscious
anybody
incompetence.
going into a new role, that's what you feel first and foremost. When you go for an interview, it's new territory.
Yes.
But staying in your comfort zone you don't progress when you stay in a comfort zone. So that feeling of not knowing and it's new territory is absolutely normal, and embrace it. Because you tell me one person that doesn't go through that. Right. It doesn't matter what level you're at. Everybody goes through that. And one of the things that was really interesting for me once was I was having a conversation with the chief executive, and he said to me, I asked him a question about, how do you know what you're doing in this area? And he said, I don't know.
The amount of people.
I have to rely on the expertise that I recruit so that I am guided. And if you think about it, nobody can know everything in a particular area. Absolutely. So that's what I would just say to people. Just think about, this is not about you having to know everything, particularly as you're transitioning.
That's wonderful advice. Such wonderful advice. I've had similar conversations with people, and might be responsible for a group of young people, in maybe when I've worked in education, or when I worked as a lecturer at one point for performing arts. And I remember saying to a friend who helped me get the job, how can I teach these young people? And they said, Riash, you've got over a decade's experience as an actress. I was like, yes, but teaching and this and this and this. And I was getting really good feedback, within the role. Obviously, I was fresh, I was new, so I didn't know exactly, how to plan and do my syllabus and things, work to a syllabus. But, a lot of them said to me the same thing. We are qualified, but we are essentially making it up within the realms of our expertise. Yes, we have a bit more experience on you, but we day to day struggle in exactly the same way. It's just a case of trusting yourself and trusting the support around you, like you say. So
And one of the things that I've come to realize is that form will follow your passion. So whatever you're passionate about, and I know that you're a very impassioned person, Riasha. So, and it will follow. So I remember, as you talk about young people and teaching, I remember when I first went into the teenage sexual health, and I thought to myself, how am I going to do this? They're going to think, oh, what's that old woman doing in teenagers aren't going to come and see me. They don't want to hear from an old woman. I was just thinking of my teenagers, thinking how they don't want to listen to me. Yeah. So, but they came in their droves because I was passionate about the subject area. I was passionate about what I was doing. I was passionate about making a difference for young people, and the differences we made was, you know, life changing for some of the young people. And so follow your passions. That's what I would say, rather than thinking about what the deficits are. Follow your passions, and form will follow that, and people will follow you when they see how passionate you are about what you want to do in life.
That is brilliant advice, especially where you say, you know, where you see the deficits. Just because you don't see the changes in that industry yet that we need to see, just because you don't see people that look like you, doesn't mean that you shouldn't be there. So again, wonderful. I've got maybe time for about 2 more questions, if you don't mind, Morvia, and then I guess I'll have to let you go to your back to your Christmassy endeavors. But I would like to just ask 2 more questions on inclusion, I think, because we've touched on identity in the workplace, which has led us nicely to imposter syndrome. But for inclusion, what shall I ask you? You've kind of answered so much in your wonderful, full discussions earlier. I think, you've answered that one just now. Rather than relying on a seat at the table being given, how can a Black woman, and these are 2 external labels that sometimes are internal as well, be proactive in cultivating a work environment where they feel heard, seen, and valued? So rather than relying on the external, how can they create that for themselves?
Yeah. And again, it comes down to, so if you want to create a seat at the table, so we talk about what we call a bicultural competence of who you are, where you are.
Again, I'm going to use that. Say that again.
Bicultural competence. Not my model, it's one of our models that we use. And so what we look at is, look at what's happening. So look at all your policies, practices, procedures within the organization. Be be aware of what they are. So that's one. That's not all of it. Then look at what the hidden cultures are within the organization. So what really goes on underneath those policies, procedures, and everything like that. So for example, let me give you an example. Many things happen outside of the boardroom. Many decisions are made on the corridors of power that you probably won't, at the pub, that you won't have access to. But it's about being aware of that's how organizations operate. It's, it's something that's not necessarily written down. Think about your own families, even, for example, as an example. So we know that, yes, we all have Christmas and we do A, B, C, D, and E at Christmas, but we know that there are hidden stuff that happen amongst that is never talked about, but we know it happens. So, for example, Uncle George always gets drunk at the Christmas table, but nobody talks about it, but it happens. Yeah. So be aware and cognizant of what the hidden culture is of your organization and the place where you want to work and where you want to be. And then within that as well, after that, well, not after, but also that first bit that I talked about, which is about getting the support from your social networks, is really important. So for example, if you have where people feel the strength when they are othered. So, for example, if you have, a religious, way of being, then that can be a really, really strengthening effect for you.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that go out and find a religion. That's not what I'm saying.
You're just giving an example of if that is one of your characteristics as part of your identity, then also rely on that.
Absolutely. And that can really help you, because often people don't bring in their, the fact that how important the social support is for their work life.
Mm-hmm.
And
they hide it and mask it, and then don't have it to rely on. Yeah.
And I'm not saying that you've got to go into work and say, these are all my religious activities. It's not about that. It's about you being secure and acknowledging what your social support is, and how important it is for your sustenance and sustainability within the system. Really, really important. Can't emphasize it enough. Your sisters.
Yes, the sisterhood is
blood
important.
Or not, sisterhood.
Yes, sisterhood,
really important.
allyship, all of it. Yes, blood or not as well.
Brotherhood. Brotherhood.
Yes.
Men are notoriously not good at talking to each other, and but what they do is, for example, I know a lot of black men go to the barber shop, and that is a fantastic means of support, even if it's just sitting in the waiting room hearing other people's stories. That is so sustaining for many black men, and it is really important to do.
So finding those areas of support outside of work, and using that to create sustenance, which leads me perfectly, I'm impressed with myself and you at this point, to my final question. And we've only just gone over the time, so I'm so happy with myself right now. The final question is, and I hope you take these accolades and labels as you should, authentically, and because they are true. As a high achieving black woman with a family and a senior leadership role within the NHS, Morvia, what do you do away from all of those titles and those roles to support your own wellness and to be your best place in and out of the workplace? Your best self, even in and out of the workplace.
Yeah. So I practice what I preach, because a lot of it is about practicing what you preach. So my social networks are absolutely key, which you are very aware of, Riasha. So I have a beautiful cousin who we go on lots and lots of trips, and I just, we download, we have our sisterhood, we just, in our heads, we put the worlds to rights, and we have fun. So music and laughter and partying is a huge nature walking. I love walking in nature. And so not only just networking, but actually I like to walk alone in nature as well. So that's really important for me. Gardening, buying plants, all of that kind of stuff, the sort of things that I thought I'd never do when I was young, but I love it now. Yeah.
No, that is really wonderful and inspiring to, I'm sure, many. Your pursuit of wellness has inspired me as well as your pursuit of knowledge. I can remember, for those of you that have just joined us a bit late in the conversation, I do know and love Morvia on a personal level as well. And I can remember when I was just in the beginnings of my further education as an adult lifelong learner, and saying, I'm not going to be finished in time for my 40s, what's the point, kind of thing, I don't want to do it, and just getting really stressed out. And I remember having a couple conversations with Morvia, who's been a lifelong learner herself to get to where you are now, and how encouraged I was at how you've pursued that and not put the ideas of the world of where you should be at a certain time upon yourself, and done it in your own time. And then also the pursuit of wellness in being connected with nature, going for those walks. And I've implemented that because it's something I've seen from my mum, it's something I've seen from yourself. Never thought I'd be finding it important to go for a walk in the park. But I think a lot of us as well, going through the pandemic, has found how important that can be as well. So you just continue to inspire me, Morvia.
And
And
you too.
oh, thank you.
You too.
You've elevated this platform. We have had some amazing, talented, insightful guests. And I just feel like you have added to that. You've elevated it because you are in such a senior position as well, you know, working for the NHS that affects all of us in the UK. Whether you're private or not, I'm sure at some point you've been in contact with the NHS. So we just thank you again and again for joining us. Have you got any final thoughts or things you want to share, or any details that you might want to leave with the community or the platform?
Well, first of all, thank you, Riasha, for inviting me to speak. And, you know, it's been wonderful having this conversation with you and all the guests,
Yes.
and those to come. But I would just like to say, you know, for everybody out there, when you're thinking, you know, particularly those who have that imposter syndrome, which is most of us, particularly as women, what I would say to you is just think about what you would say to your younger self, what you would say now to your younger self. And it's often things like, go for it, you can do this, you have more confidence than you think, you know, you can get there. So just think about that and what you would say to your treasured younger self to get to where you are now and where you want to become. Right. So that's what I would want to really leave everybody with.
Wow. Wow. Just brilliant. Thank you again, Morvia. Wonderful words and experience shared today. Wishing you a lovely rest of your day, rest of your Monday, and obviously Christmas coming up for you. So I hope that it's filled with all the things and people that you love. I'm going to give you a little technical tip because I don't know if you've done one of these conversations before. So I believe ending it, you just literally can press like leave conversation, I think, and it will disconnect you. You should be fine, or just come off Instagram when you're ready to say bye and it will disconnect you. And I'll just give my closing goodbyes to Daughters of May. So lovely speaking with you, Morvia.
And you. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye. I think it's just at your top right. Yep, she's found it. She's mastered IG Live. I'm very proud of her, because every time I come on here, I get nervous and have to reacquaint myself with how to use IG Live. So she's done really well. Thank you again for joining us. So many comments that we found today. Thank you, Mills. Thank you, my auntie Audrey. Thank you, Francique. Thank you, Shea Organics, Quantum Guru, Holly, Blessed Health, thank you for joining us. And Sendisa, thank you so much for joining us. And Carol. All of the rest of you that joined us, dipped in, dipped out, remember that you can find this conversation, Maybe Talk Series, Season 2, Episode 9, in the tabs section of Daughters of May. So if you just go to the drop down for series, it will be there. Thanks again to Morvia Gooden, and we'll see you again for May We Talk series really soon. Take care. Bye.